cool. And you guys look familiar. I think we were here for like the last one or for both of them. Nice. Are you Ida's friend? No. Okay. Are you Claire's friend?
No.
No, you just came. You're like, I just like trolls.
I was at Brother Soder the day of the first talk, and I just saw that this was going on. So
Okay. Nice. That's cool. Are you, when you came to Broder Soder, was it your first time at Nordic Northwest or?
no, I had been to Brother Soder 2 times before.
Okay. Nice. Cool. And what's your story? Why are you here? I know I saw your face last time. Yeah. You're like, you know what? I'm like a really good sport. Cool. Okay. Okay, cool. Well, now you know like, a lot. And so hopefully there's some really weird trivia game out there, and this is useful to you in some application. Cool. Well, thanks for coming. Okay, you tell me. Is it time?
It's time.
Okay, cool.
It's not working, but it's time.
It's not working?
We can't get the slides to go on Facebook. But it is what it is. So we're recording on that iPad. So that we can send them the recording right now.
So that iPad is recording
This.
the screen.
Yes.
Oh, fascinating. Okay.
I think the mic is still currently on. Should I end the live stream? Or
Do you think it would be better for the iPad for the lights to be off?
It's actually pretty clear.
Okay.
You're looking at it, so I think that's okay.
Okay, because I've noticed in the past that when the lights are on, it's a little bit harder to see with the contrast of the colors. And I personally don't need the light because I already have a light here. So maybe I would just check to see if it's better with the lights on or off. 'Cause you obviously have the choice, so I would just check.
Britta, I think it's okay like it is now.
You think so? Okay, cool. Good. Okay. Okay, we're gonna get started. Thank you for being here. Velkommen til Troll Talk. This is the third one of the series. I am Britte Rasmussen Marsh, your troll expert at Nordic Northwest. Thank you for being here tonight. And for those of you on the live stream at home, thank you as well for being here. Oh, we already run into a problem. Nope. Oh my goodness. Okay, so before we get started, some thank yous are in order. I want to say thank you to Nordic Northwest for hosting me for the third time. Investment in troll scholarship is a real thing, and this is really important to me because I'm also on the program committee here, so it's really awesome that I get to speak about my scholarship and contribute in other ways in this community. Dedications. This presentation is actually in celebration of 200 years of Norwegian immigration to the United States. This year marks that 200th year. The first boat, I believe, left out of Stavanger in 1825. And although there is much of my mom's Danish side that is evident in this presentation, I actually want to dedicate this presentation to the distant Norwegian ancestors that are found on my dad's side, and my dad is here tonight. And now I really can't move on until I get my slides. Oh, well, sheesh. So, who knows about trolls? What do you know about trolls? I know that some of you have been here 3 times in the back, real big fans, awesome. Some of you have been here twice. Is this your first time? What made you come here tonight?
When I was about 12 years old, little troll figurines were really popular, and so my best friend and I loved trolls so much, these little trolls, that we wrote a song in praise of trolls, and to the tune of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And I've been trying to remember the lyrics, but they, you know, these trolls, I don't know if anybody remembers them, but they had long hair, and I think I've seen some that more recently that don't compare at all in the quality and
Like the troll dolls?
they're about that, you know, maybe 6 inches high.
Okay.
Not very big, but you know, I had one. My friend Lori had one.
Wow.
We just loved them.
I'm curious if the dolls that you're talking about are the dolls that are going to be in this presentation. Were they the ones that were popular in the U.S. around like starting in 1962? Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
You're gonna see quite a bit of those. There's some special treat for you tonight, because there's going to be some show and tell as well, some memorabilia that you're going to be able to touch and feel that will remind you of that very special time in your life.
I think I still have that doll somewhere.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's lovely.
So,
Oh.
yeah, I'm glad that I came.
If you want to move on, you can currently manually do it from here.
It's like every 2 sentences kind of thing. So, okay. Got it? Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, down arrow. Great. Whew. Okay. Crisis averted. Okay. So, the content that I'm presenting tonight is from my historical series, Trolls: A Retrospective, which looks like this from a bird's eye perspective. You do not need to read this. This is just to show you that troll history has depth and breadth. And tonight, the history that we're going to be looking at is actually from the mid to contemporary troll periods. We're looking at 1825 through today. We're going to hop through time, and what's going to sort of put everything together is revolving around some central themes. So here we go. Trolls in modern culture and migration. The presentation is very visual, so if you ever want to move closer, even sit on the floor, you're welcome to. Here's our agenda. The run is approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes with no intermission, and there will be a moment of show and tell. Okay. Tonight's story is about diaspora, which means the dispersion or spread of a people from their original homeland. Imagine those first few steps away from everything that is familiar, everything you've always known, your language, culture, food, religion, home, sometimes your entire family, if you're traveling solo. Tonight's story is about taking chances, and with every risk comes with the possibility of loss. But it's also about the opportunity and innovation that movement ushers in. It's that tension between who I was and who I'm yet to be, and I won't know until I board that ship and the past recedes into the distance. The 19th and 20th centuries marked several waves of Nordic immigration from the countries of Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Iceland to industrial nations across the globe spanning from the Americas to Australia. For the purpose of our subject tonight, I also refer to these immigration waves as the troll diaspora, for the Nordics brought their culture with them, trolls, stowawayed in cargo holds, clinging to unfurled masts, perhaps even hidden between heirlooms in rose-mulling painted wooden chests. Yes, the trolls emigrated too. The country which received the biggest bulk of new arrivals was the United States, starting with the first Nordic wave around 1825. The impetus for immigration varied from individual to individual, but some reasons were ubiquitous. For example, let's look at Norway. Due to rapid rural population growth, there was a lack of economic opportunity. Unless you were the eldest brother of a Norwegian farming family, you would not inherit the farm, not even a little piece of it. Industrial job opportunities weren't faring much better. They were few and far in between. And forget about using your skills to start your own farm, because only 3% of Norway was arable land. Thanks to the beautiful yet agriculturally inconvenient mountain ranges, aka fjords. This is all according to Professor Emeritus H. Arnold Barton in his lecture, Nordic Migration to America, 1825-1925, at California Lutheran University. Speaking of Lutherans, another common reason for immigration was dissatisfaction with the authoritarian state churches, as each Nordic country sponsored the Lutheran denomination. According to Barton, there was widespread resentment against class-bound societies which had rigid barriers that determined who had political rights, both the right to vote as well as the right to run for office. Thus, the United States appeared to be, from afar, a country which separated church from state, and in which every citizen was entitled to inalienable rights. And so between 1825 and 1925, more than 800,000 Norwegians immigrated to North America. That's about 1/3 of the population of Norway, with the majority immigrating to the US and lesser numbers immigrating to Canada. In the article Norwegian Migration to America, featured in the Journal of the Norwegian American Historical Association, author Einar Haugen writes, with the exception of Ireland, no single country contributed a larger percentage of its population to the United States than Norway. And when these newcomers arrived at Ellis Island, many of them had a personal narrative that was contrary to the adage of, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses. According to Barton, most of these immigrants did not come from abject poverty. They did, after all, have the means to travel over here and did have a skill to trade. They were also literate due to early educational developments. And lastly, but perhaps most important of all, these were people who had learned to be adaptable by working in the woods, working at sea, and working on the farms, sometimes all in the same day. The US Library of Congress details where Nordic people went after they'd arrived. I'll look at some of these areas in greater detail later, but here's a broad overview for now. The Swedes came first and in the overall greatest numbers. They started in Delaware and Pennsylvania, which are evident by their staple dwellings, notched corner log cabins. Then they moved to the Great Lakes states and southeastern Iowa. Norwegians arrived in New York and then spread out across the continent to the prairies of northern Illinois and then Wisconsin, Minnesota, the Dakotas, and the Pacific Northwest. The Finns were actually recruited by US industries and thus were guided to specific corners of the country. The Upper Peninsula of Michigan, eventually founding the only Finnish institute of higher education in the country, Suomi College, aka Finlandia University, which unfortunately just graduated its final class in 2023. The Finns also settled in cities like Gloucester, Massachusetts, and Montgomery, Alabama. The Icelanders initially were compelled to join the exodus to Utah Territory with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, aka Mormons. Initially, they did not arrive in sufficient numbers to start their own communities, and so they tended to attach themselves to Norwegian or Swedish farm settlements or go to work for established farmers. Eventually, they founded their own towns in the Midwest and later the Dakotas, Rocky Mountains, and the West Coast. The Danes were prominent in New York, including immigrant Jonas Bronk, that's B-R-O-N-C-K, whose land north of Manhattan Island became widely known as Bronx, eventually the Bronx, B-R-O-N-X. They spread out to the Midwest to join their fellow Nordics, and there was also a fair amount of Danish Mormon pilgrims yearning to settle their new religion in Utah. Now you have some basic context to how the diaspora began. I'm going to pull you through time, through waves of immigration, and add another note about the Danes, albeit from a personal perspective, that will connect us to our first troll topic. Meet Paul Rasmussen in Copenhagen, mid-20th century. He's a talented architect, but there aren't many jobs available in his native Denmark. Meet Amy Rasmussen, Paul's spunky, vivacious wife, who's put her full faith in his career. But by golly, she's got a toddler Cern who's a real handful, and there are two twins in the oven, Jesper and Dorta. Paul needs to make a decision, stat, about which direction their life is going. Because on Paul's desk lay two acceptance letters, a visa sponsorship for America and a visa sponsorship for Australia. He applied for both, and he was granted both. Go east or go west. He chose west, San Francisco, California. This is the story of how my family came to this country. There's my mom, Dorta, the baby in the handbag on the right. That is literally one of two babies in handbags that my 120-pound mumwa carried by herself on an ocean liner from Copenhagen to California. My mofa had a burst appendix, so he got to fly. How about that? I digress. For those of you who come from a family that has a migrant narrative in the near or distant past, you might have wondered once or twice how life might have been different had your family encountered another option, an eastward wind, or a butterfly effect. I sometimes wonder not only how life might have been different if the Rasmussens had gone with the Australian option, but also how life might have been eerily similar. Given that Australia and the United States share certain characteristics, both countries are products of the British Empire, both were heavily industrialized by the 21st century, both require mastery of the English language, and Northern California and Southern Australia both have Mediterranean climates, killer wine. I wonder if the Rasmussens would have encountered a parallel experience in the hypothetical Australian version of themselves. And with this in mind, I want to share a different Danish family that faced a similar go east or go west set of circumstances. They're called the Dams. You may not know their family by name, but you do know them by reputation, because they are responsible for creating a certain special doll that swept the world by storm. And I would like to share the origin of their story, from humble beginnings in Denmark to migrating to new markets abroad. It is a truly trolly diaspora. So let's begin. In the early 1940s, a young father by the name of Thomas Dam sat on a chair by the fire in his home of Gjol, Denmark, whittling his worries away into a wood carving. He had reason to feel worried. During World War II, the factory which was responsible for supplying him with the flour to run his bakery had closed. So now he was bankrupt. He didn't know what to do. The only work available at the time was to shovel snow. And since he wasn't a large and strong man, this was not a viable path. He needed a new source of income, a change in career for changing times. As his son Niels recounts, "My father came from a home where you don't sit with your hands and do nothing. Even back when we were baking, we would carve at night by the fireplace, cutting funny figures to make us laugh." So even though this period of Dam's life was devastating in terms of financial uncertainty, he later recalled, "It was the greatest bankruptcy ever. I never had to get up early again, as bakers do, and it got me carving more." Eventually, his wife Betty convinced him to gather up this small army of figurines and sell them in the nearest city called Aalborg. Dam took the chance on changing his luck and set out to sell his figurines door to door in Aalborg. Believe it or not, on his first trip, he sold them all. In the book Timeless Toys, Classic Toys and the Playmakers Who Created Them by Tim Walsh, Niels laughed when he later told the story. "My father soon realized that he could make 2 or 3 times what he was making throwing snow. Plus, he could sit by the fire and carve, which he loved doing." It wasn't long until one of his best customers, who owned an amusement park, asked Dam to push his carving skills to new heights by creating some monsters for a haunted house exhibit. Dam accepted the challenge. In order to achieve what the customer wanted within the designated time frame, and to give these creatures a more lifelike quality, Dam needed to come up with a new method for his work. So he started by designing the creatures in clay and then using a gypsum cast to mold them into flexible rubber. He now had a means of producing figurines in a timely fashion with a medium that allowed for the expression of more nuanced facial features. Dam developed a positive reputation with a loyal customer base and continued to receive commissions. He was able to financially support his family for the first time after the war, and this was just the beginning. Word got around. I mean, really got around, all the way across the pond to Sweden. It was 1956, and a large department store contracted him to create a Santa Claus figure for their Christmas display, which was 2 stories high. It was a huge endeavor. The body itself would be mostly made of metal by other workers, but Dam was responsible for its most endearing features, the head and the hands. The work was such a hit that another department store back in Aalborg requested a similar scale Santa figure for their Christmas display. Once the figure was complete and installed within the store, Dam examined it from afar on the sidewalk outside. He realized that there was an issue. The Santa was too large for the pedestrians to properly see it. So, he decided to construct a window display. He thought, what kind of small creatures can I design to draw in people's curiosity? Elves are a Christmas classic, that's true, but they're everywhere, a dime a dozen. No, something unique was needed, something surprising, something that would make you pause, double take even, and reconsider maybe what you thought you already knew. Trolls. According to classictroll.com, which has become the contemporary site for Dom's legacy, throughout Dom's childhood, he had heard many tales of evil trolls that were living in the woods adjacent to Gjol, as well as in the mountain, which is for Denmark, a small hill that is about 18 meters high on the outskirts of town, because in Denmark there are no mountains. These stories about how the trolls would do harmful things and even hurt the townspeople if they became disappointed with their behavior had roots in Scandinavian mythology and had been shared for centuries and passed down from generation to generation. However, Dom was convinced that the common picture was too simple and that there had to be trolls out there with the opposite characteristics as well. And we're going to pause on Dom's story for just a minute, because we really need to consider how unique it was that Dom had this perspective about trolls to begin with, that a Dane would have this perspective to begin with. Because despite the fact that Denmark is a Nordic country, trolls do not originate in Denmark. Controversial statement, I'm going to back it up. Trolls are a distinctly northern Nordic phenomenon. The oldest recorded encounters with trolls stem from the Old Norse mythology of the Viking Age, most notably the Edda, written in Iceland in 1220 Common Era. Encounters between trolls and humans often paralleled that of giants with the gods, bouts of antagonism, sometimes kinship, often otherworldly circumstances that defy explanation. And once Christian conversion came to Scandinavia, the church deemed trolls ungodly, and so trolls survived persecution by going underground, finding refuge in people's souls through folk belief, which continued despite the tenets preached by the Catholic and later Lutheran denominations. Oral storytelling traditions in the countryside kept troll tales alive. Trolls hid in plain sight in the rural regions of Norway, where dramatic mountain ranges gave way to abruptly winding fjords which led out to torrential seas. And in Sweden, with its forests of round boulders ground smooth by the melted glaciers of ancient times, lots of nooks and crannies and caves and dwellings to call home for centuries. But Denmark, flat little old Denmark, was not troll-tolerant territory. That is, until everything changed with a folk art movement in the mid-1800s. In Norway, it was called Romantic nationalism, and folklorists from the cities ventured out into the woods, seeking to collect stories from the common folk that reflected an authentic Nordic past. And that is how folklore about trolls was published and illustrated for readers in urban areas. That is how troll tales traveled down south to Denmark. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, what about Danish fairy tales? There's got to be trolls in there, right? How about that Hans Christian Andersen guy? You know, Denmark's top storyteller. Certainly the top writer that was specializing in folklore content in the mid-1800s. I'm sorry to tell you that pre-20th century, the connection between Danes and trolls was tertiary at best. Hans Christian Andersen wrote over 150 fairy tales in his lifetime, and 2 included references to trolls. And they're blink and you'll miss it. Oofda for the Danes. So, now you can appreciate how innovative it was that in 1956, Thomas Dam selected the troll as his muse. Not elves, not Nisa, not gnomes, but the troll. Furthermore, these trolls would accompany Santa Claus in a window display at that Swedish department store, and he determined to make them good-natured in disposition. Dom's son Niels recalled how it was done. My father took mattress springs and made the body of the first troll dolls. He sculpted the hands and face from rubber, and the spring was the body, which was hidden by a dress, like a hand puppet. These springy Christmas trolls were attached to a long plank with a simple mechanism that turned slowly around, so the trolls were lifted and lowered. So it looked like they were waving at the customers with their sweet, whimsical dispositions. And that was all it took. Even though the Christmas trolls were just part of the window display, the department store owner was confronted with people asking for a price. Every single one of these prototypes was sold before Christmas even came. The owner told Dom, "You've got to make more of these because people are going crazy. They come in here and say, 'I gotta buy this.'" And just like blossoms sprung from the seed, the first troll doll craze had begun. The Dom family came together in full force and started to work together in the back room of their home. They churned out as many trolls as they could, using the gypsum casting method to mold them into natural rubber, which would be stuffed with wood shavings, as you can see here. Small pieces of sheepskin would be sewn on top of their head for their hair, which would give them their signature characteristic, and then the clothes would be sewn onto the body. It was a laborious process, and the Dom family soon realized that they needed more help to keep up with the demand. It was time to take the plunge, the biggest risk they'd yet to take, committing the family's industry to trolls by building a factory in Gjöl. And they did just that, May 11th, 1959, and they named their company Dom Things. Now that several iterations of production methods had come to pass, Dom was ready to switch out the rubber mold method for something else, something better. These rubber cast molds deteriorated after 40 uses and consisted of many parts that had to be hand glued. "Nay, nay," you can imagine him muttering to himself at all these wasted materials. Like any good Dane, inefficiency was starting to get under his skin. Lucky for him, a new method had just hit the market that used rotational molding and a material called polyvinyl chloride, PVC, aka plastic. PVC rotation molding decreased the time the assembly process took, while subsequently allocating higher quality time for the handmade elements of the dolls that gave them texture and life. By now, Dom had a smooth running operation, a signature look, growing sales, and demand in shops all over Europe. And the dolls had a real name too, the Good Luck Trolls. According to Timeless Toys, Classic Toys, and the playmakers who created them, Dom's creations were bow-legged, pot-bellied, and wrinkled-faced. They had wide heads and a crooked, toothless smile. Their pointy ears were huge, and their deer-in-the-headlights eyes stared longingly, as if searching for some affection. Their arms spread open, offering a hug, with hands that each ended in 4 stubby little fingers. But the most memorable element of these dolls was their wild penny-in-the-light socket hair made from dyed wool. At the height of their popularity, Dom purchased Iceland's entire harvest of wool. The trolls were famous. It's amazing what a little PR can do for a troll. They were once known as fearsome, loathsome antagonists of men. And the Doms were doing exceptionally well. They hadn't even had their debut outside of Europe yet, which would come in 1961. But let's put a pin here for now, because we gotta pick up on the transcontinental troll diaspora that we started before. Here's a little teaser though. Some foreshadowing spoken by Thomas Dam himself. When musing about the trajectory of his career many, many years later, he found humor in the fact that so much beauty had come from a creature so ugly. He said, "The trolls are so ugly that when you look at them, you can't help but laugh. And when you laugh, luck follows you." So, Dom's trolls are not the only trolls who found their footing on foreign soils. So let's pick up on our discussion of Nordic migration in general. All aboard the Midwest Express. You know how there's that work ethic stereotype that's said about people from Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, etc.? It's that they're early to rise and late to bed. They work harder, stay longer, get the job done, no matter what. Oh, and no whining about it either. Much of this conception comes from the region's agricultural roots. And who moved to the Midwest to start farms? Just look at the demographics here. Scandinavians, and other people too, of course. Minnesota, 32% of the population of the state are Scandinavian American, according to the 2000 US Census. That equates to 1,500,000 plus, making it the #1 place in the country for Scandinavian Americans. Here's another #1. In 2017, Minnesota ranked first in the nation for grain sales. So put it all together, you've got a lot of farmers with a lot of work to do. There's only so many hours in a day. It makes one nostalgic for the good old days when Ola and Lena had 15 kids to till the soil. Alas, the price of children increases by the decade, and who has time for that anymore? Does anyone know an Ola and Lena joke? Okay, well, they exist. I was hoping someone would know one. Okay. Speaking of time, let's talk about time. What the folks in the Midwest have in common with their Scandinavian ancestors is an uneasiness about the concept of free time. This is also known as hanging out, chilling. Idleness in general doesn't happen when you have a farm. This was true of early Scandinavians up until a point several hundred years ago when the everyday demands of farming became a little bit more manageable. But even then, these people would not rest. Professor Harley Refsall writes about this in his presentation, From Doderholt to Decorah, Scandinavian Figure Carving and Folk Arts Migration to the New World. He says, "The phenomenon of leisure time appeared at one point, so carpenters and builders, it made sense for them to transfer their skills at the end of the workday into wood carving. Often inspired by Old Norse design, they would carve decorative facades on the boards of doors, which would make them more competitive to sell. There's an expression in Norwegian which translates to "the eye also has its needs," which means two things: that one should decorate more lavishly, and that also one can make a living by turning from farming to working with one's hands as an artist. For women, this meant using their skills towards textiles, and for men, it was wood and blacksmithing. This cultural impulse of being useful at all times, even at leisure, you might remember from the beginning of Thomas Dom's origin story. He always wanted to keep his hands busy, even at home by the fire, so he carved wood. And those wood carvings that he made would become the prototypes for his good luck trolls. So what does this have to do with the Midwest? I'll share with you. Folk art. Okay, we're going to talk about folk art quite a bit, and so I'm going to give you a full minute in silence to check out this definition for yourself, and then I will read along with you. So folk art is an umbrella term for artistic works produced typically in cultural isolation by untrained and often anonymous artists or by artisans of varying degrees of skill. This includes paintings, sculpture, basketry, utensils, facades, and textiles. Folk art is marked by such attributes as highly decorative design, bright, bold colors, flattened perspective, strong forms, in simple arrangements, and immediacy of meaning that emphasize the handmade over machine manufacture. You don't have to memorize this information. Just let it soak in. In fact, over the next section, I'm going to remind you of some of these attributes whenever you see some artistic works on the screen. When you see brown text with yellow background, that is me reminding you of these folk art attributes, so we can keep track of it together. Let's start with an example. All right. You've got artists like Herbert Andy S. Anderson, born in Chicago to two Swedish immigrants, who was recognized as a master of 20th century wood carving, most famously for his flat plane style of caricatures. Note, flat plane and flattened perspective are terms often used to describe wood-carved folk art because the figures, any figure on this slide in fact, from the cowboy to the cows to the doctors, are carved in large flat planes with a carving knife. Flat plane carving rebukes curvature, no curves, no rounding, no sanding. Instead, when it's done well, the tool marks are left in the carving on purpose, which creates a uniquely cubist effect. This style of figure carving is still widely practiced today in the Ozarks. And as for the immediacy of meaning, well, you tell me what's going on with this cowboy. He's got a red face. What do you think? Seriously, what do you think? Yeah, so he likes to smoke. Sunburned? Maybe he's sunburned, but he's got a hat. Could be embarrassed. Mm-hmm. Could be a drinker too. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. 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 Absolutely. I think any of those could be true. Okay, so let's take a look at some other examples in the Midwest and other folk art that they've produced within the Scandinavian diaspora. But first, a little bit of a textbook moment. Don't be scared. Don't be scared of this textbook, but we do have to learn some kind of heavy stuff. So this next segment draws heavily from an academic chapter that was shared with me by the Mount Horeb Area Historical Society in Wisconsin. And so I'm just going to give the authors their credit right at the beginning. It's called The Triumph of Trolls, the Making, Remaking, and Commercialization of Heritage Identity. And it appears in a book that's called Authenticity in North America, Place, Tourism, Heritage, Culture, and the Popular Imagination, edited by Courtney Anderson Kramer, published by Taylor and Francis in 2019. So in this next segment, we're going to talk about how communities in the Midwest that have been shaped by Scandinavian identity have either held on to those ethnic roots and have, festivals or museums, or in some cases where communities have reinvented and reinvested in a narrative about their Nordic past and used folk art along the way. They do this to publicize a message to the outside world that says, hey, outside world, we're Scandinavian and it's cool and you should come visit us. And and spend money in our town. Okay? So that's all theory. I'm going to give you examples so all of this is going to make sense. Here's a passage from the chapter. Okay. The Midwest is home to a number of communities which rely on a formulated and performed sense of ethnicity. Many of these communities are within the driftless area, an unglaciated landscape stretching across southwest Wisconsin and portions of Minnesota, Iowa, and Illinois. Marked by rolling hills and river-cut valleys surrounded by prairie, it is easy to imagine a troll watching passerby from the shadows. Such as the closed earthly feature like the caves of Blue Mound State Park. The residents have marketed the existence of trolls in the region as early as the 1960s. There's a lot to unpack there. And of course, my mind instantly wants to go to the trolls in the caves. But, discipline, I want to ask you, my audience, about this phrase, formulated and performed sense of ethnicity. Formulated and performed sense of ethnicity. What do you think it means? Like really, I'm actually asking you, what do you think that means? What does it mean to perform one's ethnicity? What does it mean to formulate cultural heritage? I actually want you to attempt to respond to these questions with the person sitting next to you for a minute. Go. Hey, Amber, you want to come up front? So she's front. Yeah. Got about 15 seconds. Okay, and 3, 2, 1. All right. I hope your discussions were fruitful. There's a lot of different ways to look at these questions, and maybe some of you discussed the idea of heritage tourism, maybe. So now I'm going to highlight some communities in the Midwest for your consideration. Starting with Stoughton, Wisconsin. Okay. Also, note the mural, bright and bold. Norwegians began arriving in Wisconsin in the late 1830s. But by 1890, certain counties had become ethnically Norwegian-dominated agricultural hubs, such as Dane County, not named after Danish people, by the way. This map from Norwegians in Wisconsin by Richard J. Fapso demonstrates that Dane County had the largest number of Norwegians in the state according to the census. These Norwegians brought all sorts of cultural customs and artifacts with them. Across the bottom of this page, you can see the Stoughton mural painted in bright, bold colors that was made in 1997 to commemorate the town's heritage. You can't quite see it in the cropped image from this vantage point, but painted on top of the trunk is a style of Norwegian folk art that's called rosemaling, which means rose painting, and it's highly decorative in style. You'll see a better example of this later, but I do want to note that early arrivals to Stoughton did indeed come with rose-mailed trunks that they carried all the way across the Atlantic. Inside these trunks were trolls, maybe. More on that later. We do know, though, that according to Faspo, that many brought with them beautiful specimens of Norwegian art and handicrafts, such as breastpins and brooches designed to be worn with folk costumes among all classes of Norwegian society. Although these examples of old world art and handicraft were never used to the extent that was customary in Norway, because during the early period of the Norwegian experience, little opportunity existed for expressing the refinement of one's cultural heritage. It was tough out there, plowing soil on the prairie frontier. Early Norwegian skonies resembled the gray garb of the Puritans more so than any of the funky festive colors that you see folks wearing in this mural. I mean, this mural is a highly romanticized re-envisionment of the settling of Wisconsin. Do you associate the Midwest with these colors in general? You know, I'm not trying to hate. I'm just connecting the dots for these ideas that we're playing with here. There's the reality of cultural identity from those who actually lived it, and then there's the remaking of cultural identity later by those who inherit it. Every year on the 17th of May, Stoughton celebrates its Norwegian heritage through a massive festival called Syttende Mai, or Norwegian Constitution Day. Those of you who are versed in Norwegian history will know that the Norwegian Constitution was signed in 1814, and it's a big public holiday in Norway to this day. So, since Norwegians began immigrating to the US in 1825, it would make sense that those early settlers to Stoughton who spoke Norwegian, who had living memory of the old world, that, you know, the 1800s, early 1800s of Dane County would be the heyday of celebrating Syttende Mai, right? Wrong. Wrong, wrong, wrong. It was not until 1952 that this celebration became a citywide tradition. According to Faspo, although Norwegian immigrants continued to celebrate their traditional holidays and feast days, the wearing of obvious festive dress and costume was, for the most part, abandoned. It was not until the mid-20th century, with the rise of ethnic consciousness among later generations, that these costumes again became popular for folk dances and gala celebrations, such as the annual Syttende Mai celebration in Stoughton. It should be noted that this celebration is not only for the enjoyment of residents. It attracts throngs of tourists, heritage tourists in particular, those seeking connection with an authentic Norwegian-American experience. Think exhibitions, sales, concerts, athletics, food and beverage. It is easily Stoughton's highest grossing commercial event, attracting up to 20,000 attendees per year. It's big money, honey. So let's check out another Midwestern community that has a similar situation. Lindsborg, Kansas, aka Little Sweden, USA. Some fast facts. Swedish immigrants began settling the Smoky Valley region in 1868. With them, they brought their language, traditional garments, maypole dance, and no folk art more famous than the Dala horse featured here. Remember Herbert Andy S. Anderson and his flat plane carving style. He was Swedish American. Check out the way that the Dala horses and most of the cows are featured in profile, and they both have that distinctly cubist look. The Dala horses, of course, have an even richer folk art element. They are painted in bright, bold colors like fire red and cerulean blue, and their floral arrangements give them a distinctly decorative design. For the Scandinavians in Lindsborg, like their counterparts in Stoughton, the initial decades of pioneering was rough. Have you ever read a Willa Cather novel? It's Nebraska, but close enough. Kansas, soil was till and toil from dusk until dawn. They were busy, no parties. So it wasn't until several generations passed that in the mid-20th century, 1948, that the town of Lindsborg would host its very first Svensk Hyllningsfest, or Swedish Honoring Festival. And it's happened biennially ever since. There's a parade and folk dancing, arts and crafts, a smorgasbord, and more. And also like Stoughton, the festival attracts 20,000 plus attendees each year, which is big numbers, big money for a town of less than 4,000 residents. So I think you're getting the idea. I think you're getting the hang of this idea of a formulated and performed sense of ethnicity. So I'm going to very briefly summarize this next one. Elkhorn, Iowa. Fill in the blanks. Small town in the Midwest, settled by Nordic immigrants in the late 1800s who were super busy farming. Time passes. It's the mid-20th century, and there's a resurgence in ethnic celebration and a push towards commercialization. This time, it's the Danes. Elkhorn boasts quite a lot for a town of 600 residents. A windmill built in 1868, the Museum of Danish America, which opened in 1994, an homage to the Copenhagen Harbor's Little Mermaid statue, and Viking Hjem, a fully functional Viking blacksmith shop that also hosts combat reenactments. So question, what is it about the mid-20th century America that prompted some of these historically Scandinavian communities to formulate and perform a sense of ethnicity? Like, why then? So I'm going to read a little bit more from that textbook chapter, The Triumph of Trolls. By the mid-20th century, some communities throughout the Midwest were experiencing the dilemma of being pushed out of progress by the construction of highways and industries that bypass their towns. Rather than accept the fate of abandonment, some of these communities began to incorporate ethnic identity markers onto the landscape, sometimes influencing a rebrand of their communities as concept towns, which would become a significant driving force of their economies. One such place was Mount Horeb in Dane County, Wisconsin. In the 1980s, state officials in Wisconsin planned to construct a bypass of Business Highway 18151, leaving Mount Horeb, a town which depended on trucker tourism to fend for itself. In response, the Mount Horeb Advancement Association and the Chamber of Commerce convened together to strategize on how to draw upon the town's legacy of Norwegian ethnic identity as a source of tourism. But what were they going to do that could draw people into town if it was out of the way? Thought the townspeople. There had already been a variety of initiatives that had marked Mount Horeb as a Norwegian-themed cultural destination over the past decades of the 20th century. For example, there were public-facing artifacts painted with rosemelling. Remember this term? By local folk artist and seamstress Oljana Kunin. You're going to hear her name a lot because Oljana did so much to put Mount Horeb's Norwegian narrative on the map. She was the first Mount Horeb artist to bring trolls out of the trunks they'd been kept in since emigrant times. She combined rosemelling and trolls by painting their imagery on plates. She made troll dolls. Troll dolls, we're coming back to that, you see. But Oljana started to make these troll dolls in Mount Horeb around 1960 when Barbies were big, but before Thomas Dom's Good Luck Trolls had hit the shelves in the United States. She was a trendsetter. The doll on the right is an example of her earliest work, which embraces the folk art emphasis of handmade over machine manufacture. According to Ann Smart Martin at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Kunin's figures were typically made using copper wire armature that was padded to create the body and limbs. She then molded and painted the clay hands and faces. And you can see how her dolls evolved over time, images bottom, center, and left. The softer facial features and the playfulness evident in the diorama reflect her enjoyment. And she had a lot of enjoyment presenting these characters. Also initiated by the late Kunin in 1967 was an annual performance of The Song of Norway, a musical about the life and times of Norwegian composer Edvard Grieg. Kunin's responsibility was costume design, image right, because sewing was one of her key trades in town. And she also illustrated the rose-melled signage on the show, or for the show on image left. Of note, within the special pamphlet from the 25th anniversary Image Center, which is housed at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, you can see in the Song of Norway, the setting of Act 1, Scene 1 is in Trollhaugen, Hill of the Trolls, as is Act 2, Scene 3, Grieg's home, because the composer named his own homestead after his favorite subject, the trolls. True story. Prior to Kunin's influence, Mount Horeb also hosted the annual Scandinavian Winter Festival, which featured snow sculptures of trolls. You can see the folk art-inspired logo of the festival here, including strong two-dimensional forms in simple but effective arrangements. And what locals could forget the ambitious Living History Museum of Little Norway in neighboring Blue Mounds, which ran from 1927 to 2012. It was like Disneyland for heritage tourists. Little Norway even included a replica of a stavkirke, a stave church, which had wood-carved doorways and window frames ornamented in the folk art tradition of dragons and beasts. But now it was the 1980s, and the highway bypass was threatening to cut off Mount Horeb from traffic that it had relied on for decades. Frankly, there were other communities nearby, like Stoughton, for example, with its big embrace of commercialized Norwegianness that could siphon tourists away from Mount Horeb. In our textbook chapter, the authors quote Barbara Kirschenblatt Gimblett in saying, "To compete for tourists, a location must become a destination. To compete, destinations must be distinguishable, which is why the tourism industry requires the production of difference." So the townspeople dug deep into their history and asked, what could make us even more distinguishable to create even more ethnic markers that make this location the location? Yes, Norwegian, but bigger and better. And the answer came. More trolls en masse. Mount Horeb rebranded itself as the troll capital of the world by erecting 34 sculptures of trolls along the main thoroughways of the town. The Seaver family of open house imports is credited with pushing this idea from conception to actualization. And here it is, the Trollway. This is from the Mount Horeb Chamber of Commerce's website, where you can actually take a virtual troll stroll. I will share as many trolls as time allows. These trolls are typically wooden sculptures, often carved in flat plane style by chainsaw. Talk about handmade. Some trolls are painted while others are left natural. Most were produced by artists in the community, such as Patricia Pat Edmondson and Mike Feeney. The sculptures typically stand between 3 and 5 feet tall, making them smaller and childlike. Each troll displays a unique personality, often satirically representing the business at which they are positioned. For example, the sour-faced troll holding a beer, image left, welcomes customers to the Grumpy Troll Brew Pub. And Mr. Moneybags, image right, does so for Farmers Savings Bank. Business owners began to incorporate their company's theme or logo into the troll's appearance, such as image right with Village Smile Care, and image left, Culver's Burgers and Shakes. Other trolls are more abstract and were rendered from suggestively shaped natural objects, such as Troll Hovel or Troll Mountain, image right. Also, the American Family Insurance troll, which springs from naturally twisted slabs of wood, image left. Others still are made from recycled mixed metals, such as Ranyar the Rusty on the left, or the Troll Outside Sun Cafe on the right. My personal favorites are the weirdos at Suniva Inn. That hottie on the left especially, she's like the manifestation of all of my internal dialogues. Too true, too true. I had the great fortune of visiting Mount Horeb a few years back and checking out the Trollway myself. I highly recommend visiting. They actually had, they hosted me as a part of their grand opening celebration of a new troll wing of their museum. And I thank them every single day for inviting me, because it was one of the coolest experiences of my life. So despite the highway bypass, this community has been successful in becoming a destination that is distinguishable and different, and I hope that trolls and humans live in harmony for many years to come. All right, last spot that we're gonna visit in the Midwest is Alliance, Ohio, home of the Troll Hole Museum, which is marked in the Guinness Book of Records as having the world's largest collection of troll dolls. Owned and operated by Sherry Groom, featured here, there are over 8,300 trolls on the premises and counting. Thomas Dahm would be proud. Which is a perfect segue. It's time to switch gears and return to the story of Thomas Dahm, the designer and inventor of Good Luck Trolls. By 1958, his troll dolls were flying off the shelves of toy stores in his native Denmark, Greater Scandinavia, and across the European continent. Building the Dahm Things factory in Gjol, Denmark had thus far proved to be a lucrative and rewarding decision. Now, though, there was additional demand for dolls, and this time it came from beyond Europe's borders. 1962 marked the year that the Dahm family took their biggest risk yet by following the craze to where these new consumers lived and erecting brand new factories, one in New Zealand to address the Australian demand and one in Florida for the American demand. So here we had a mid-century Danish family opting to try both East and West options that were available to them. What a parallel interesting. I wonder what would happen, what consequences might come. May they fare well. Let's start what happened in America. By the mid-1960s, millions of trolls were being sold across North America under their new US distributor, Unita Doll Company, which hosted a factory in Florida. In 1964 alone, Americans bought 1 million trolls. A million! According to the Smithsonian article, The Colorful History of Trolls, prices during this time ranged roughly from 65 cents to up to $5.95 per doll. And the trolls were a vehicle for pricier add-ons such as clothing and accessories. A 1966 Sears advertisement featured here tempted shoppers with exclusive releases including a Troll Village playset and a prehistoric model home furnished in true troll decor. And with that, I have some show and tell for you. It just so happens that last year my cousin was at Hollywood Vintage and said, I saw this thing I thought you might like. What happened? Okay, I'm gonna let you figure that out while I show you this. Okay, there it is. So it's this. It is this exact same thing, and it's plastic, so plastic never dies. I think it's from like early 1960s. Ooh, yes. So I'm gonna pass this around. There is a soccer troll in here. You can play with him as much as you want. Check out the lay of the land. So here you go. That is show and tell number 1, and you can just pass this way. Show and tell number 2, got to be a little more gentle with. I will show you how to handle show and tell number 2. Okay, this is Amber Faye. This is a original 1964 Thomas Dam troll doll. Her name is Amber Faye because she has amber eyes and she's fabulous, like my best friend Amber, but also because she's an earlier troll doll, they were making the handmade elements that they used were mid-century was not the same as how the eyes that they make in dolls today. So the eyes, when you actually look at them, have, they're a little weird. They're a little disturbing. And my best friend Amber May has a dog named Faye that looks like Ed from The Lion King because of their eyes. So this is why her name is Amber Faye. I'm also going to show you, so I'm going to remove the button of her little robe. Do not try to put this button back on. So you can see, if you just remove this, and you can see on the back, it says copyright 64 DAM. So you can see that it is a original Thomas Dam troll doll. Oh, also, last thing, this is, the hair is made with mohair, so that's like goat. Here you go. You're so welcome. No food or drink on her, please. Lastly, this is not a vintage piece, but I do want to pass it around as well. Troll dolls have had a resurgence over the decades, most recently because of the Trolls movies. And so this is actually a limited edition Trolls lipstick from 2008 that came out with the Trolls movies. So I'm wearing this color right now. It's called Sushi Kiss. It was a collaboration between Good Luck Trolls and MAC lipsticks. So I thought I would kind of share that as well. Yes, I love show and tell. Cool. Yep, feel free to play as I continue. All right. Cool. Okay. So, having one troll doll evidently was not enough for US consumers, as it was estimated that Americans spent $100,000 per month on trolls for the decade. And with thematic outfits and different hair and skin modalities like Hawaiian, scuba, clown, sailor, Viking, Santa Claus, you could build whole troll communities. And don't forget about the troll animals. What's a village without a farm? You had troll monkeys, troll lions, troll cows, troll giraffes. Collections expanded rapidly. For lifestyle statements, there was spin-off merchandise, troll bed sheets, bean bags, t-shirts, jewelry, stationery, keychains. It just went on and on and on. In the doll world, troll dolls were second only to Barbie. They were loved by a variety of people, not just kids, from hippies to First Lady President Lyndon B. Johnson's wife, Lady Bird Johnson. According to ClassicTroll.com, the current homepage of Thomas Dom's legacy, the U.S. Toy Industry Association named the Good Luck Troll the Toy of the Year. And in 1964, the troll doll was used as a mascot on the entrance pass for the World Exhibition in New York of that year. They were often featured in media en masse. Images of whole communities of troll dolls working together to overwhelm human life by sheer force of whimsy. Just look at them here on the cover of the Danish Family Journal in 1959, image left, where the featured model, Dom's daughter Layla, has just been taken over by trolls, and based on her expression, I don't think she minds. Yet, when we pan to the image right, the consent is not so clear. In the world of the 1960s American print journalism, you really couldn't get much bigger than Life magazine. So what are the editors of Life trying to tell us about troll dolls in the US market? In the image, we see a human model laying captive to an army of imps, as the headline reads. We can't see the model's facial expression, so we're left to determine for ourselves how she feels about the current situation. But we see the trolls' faces clearly. Their expression of goodwill is in contrast to the deed of human suppression. The busyness of these figures is evident. Each unit of the community appears to be contributing to a common objective. Is it for fun, make-believe? Not sure, but here's the thought. The photo we're looking at flips the script on the classic troll narrative from Nordic mythology and folklore. In those narratives, the trolls rarely control the outcome of the conflict. They don't win, the humans do. The human character is the protagonist, and sometimes the human hero's journey is actually dependent on vanquishing trolls. But here in Life magazine, life is different. The human is not in control, and we as viewers are kind of excited about it. We're not in old Europe anymore. This is the new world. Welcome to the troll diaspora. By crossing oceans, trolls are flipping scripts. And with that in mind, here's one more example of Dom's Good Luck Troll's adventures abroad. This is Betty Miller, American pilot, and in 1963, the first woman to fly solo across the Pacific Ocean. Departing from Oakland, California, in order to deliver a plane to a customer in Brisbane, Australia, she wasn't completely alone. In the cockpit beside her sat a troll doll named Dammit. Following the flight, Miller was invited to the White House to be awarded the FAA's Gold Medal for Exceptional Service by President John F. Kennedy. There, she introduced the president to her traveling companion, Dammit, image right. As one savvy reported for the New York Daily News commented, "Ask not what the president thinks of your troll doll, ask your troll doll what it thinks of your president." Hopefully this event was a positive sign for human troll diplomacy in the future. Meanwhile, Betty Miller's plane wasn't the only hot ticket item that landed down under that season. As I mentioned before, the Dom family had decided to expand their enterprise in both northern and southern hemispheres, and so gave permission to a Danish-born immigrant to erect a family in New Zealand. This immigrant named Pascard exported troll dolls from New Zealand to consumers in Australia throughout the 1960s until he died in 1969 and his sons took over the business. Admittedly, in my research, there's not a lot of information about the troll doll market in New Zealand and Australia, just not a lot of records. I have some fractious facts, but here's a summary of them. The dolls down under have a NZ stamped underneath their foot and on their backs, but not always. They're made of squishy vinyl, which is a softer material than PVC. Their clothes used buttons instead of rivets and snaps. And the dolls are more expensive because there's less of them available. Here's an advertisement featured in the Canberra Times, posted by a department store that implores you, if you buy a troll, it will bring you good luck. But alas, it appears the good luck ran out for the trolls down under. The doll's popularity in the Australian market waned in the 70s, and so the New Zealand factory closed its doors around 1980. The troll dolls experienced a drought of demand within the American market in the 70s as well, mirroring the Australian outcome in some ways, but not for the same reasons. The Florida factory actually kept its doors open, and the dolls would later bounce back for a second peak of popularity in the US later down the road. But sadly, Thomas Dom himself would not be alive to experience the resurgence of his life's work. He died of cancer in 1989. Thomas Dom was undoubtedly a pioneer of cuteness found in ugliness, of whimsical surrender, and of the enduring power of recreating troll narratives. However, he died with some unfinished business lingering on his legacy. It's important to remember now that the Dom family was Danish and not American. Their business, Dom Things, which had been incorporated in 1959, was Danish, not American. Although they had secured a distributor for their product on US soil, which was Unida, somewhere along the way, they received some bad advice in obtaining international copyright protection for their products. The terms copyright, fair use, and public domain would dominate the legal narrative of the Dom family for years to come. And this is what actually led to the decline in popularity of the Good Luck Trolls while Thomas Dom was still alive. Here's what happened. According to the Smithsonian Magazine, the company confronted copyright infringement issues because Dom Things hadn't properly obtained international copyright. That placed troll dolls in the public domain, and various manufacturers exploited a gap in US copyright law to create knockoff troll products with cheaper materials and offered a lower price. So, imagine competing for customers with established manufacturers like Russ and Hasbro, to name a few of the competitors. The bottom line for the average American consumer, pennies on the dollar. Who needs a name brand when you can get a knockoff for cheap? For the most part, customers couldn't tell the difference between the dolls or didn't care. Needless to say, the projected loss of revenue for Dom Things was enormous. And as if it couldn't get worse, it did. The Dom family discovered that their own distributor, Unida Doll Company, had been selling their own unlicensed version of Good Luck Trolls called Wishnix. The story continues. As a result, the non-licensed troll dolls and troll merchandise flooded the market, and interest in the dolls declined significantly. And these legal disputes remained unresolved for the duration of Thomas Dom's life. Decades passed. Then the 90s. A fresh wave of demand for Thomas Dombo's Good Luck Trolls. This was because the original troll doll enthusiasts, children of the 1960s, were all grown up and having families of their own. They wanted to introduce the dolls to their children, and so production picked up again. The Dom family relicensed their design with Norfin and released a new range of dolls with diverse facial expressions. Alas, there was still heavy competition. The good luck troll design was still floating in the public domain. Companies like Hasbro, Russ, Ace, Dark Horse, and Target, among many others, exploited the licensing gap and churned out counterfeits by the thousands. Ace Novelty, in particular, sold a very popular version called Treasure Trolls that had a sparkly gemstone belly button and were marketed as being lucky. Once again, troll dolls oversaturated the market and sales plummeted. Then finally, a resolution occurred. After decades of copyright litigation, the 1994 Uruguay Round Amendment Act changed US copyright law to bring it into alignment with the treaty. As a result, foreign companies and individuals whose intellectual property had previously been part of the public domain received copyright privileges once again. At last, in 1996, Dam Things managed to restore its Good Luck Troll doll copyright. The design was Dam Things only. And a decade later, the trolls were back again, bigger than ever. The Dam family sold Dam Things Entertainment establishment to DreamWorks Animation SKG in 2003, which granted DreamWorks exclusive rights to the iconic dolls. In November 2016, they released the movie Trolls, an animated musical comedy that grossed nearly $142 million on its first month in theaters. This was followed up by the 2020 Trolls World Tour, which, if you haven't seen it, it's even better than the first one, I admit. And as much as it's embarrassing to admit, I actually cried while watching it. I did. There's something about the message of the film that struck me as timely for the issues that we're facing in American society today, and arguably always have. The film is about identity, it's about migration, it's about heritage myths, revisiting those narratives with humility and compassion. Look at this troll diaspora and see how far they've come from their native land. Do they resemble the old world trolls? What have they kept? What have they gained? And look at us here. Each one of us contains a diaspora of 1,000,000 steps, 1,000 hopes, 100 ancestors, but just one life and just one journey. Thank you. Keep in touch. Good.